Hello everyone and welcome to a Martlets conversation. Today we're going to talk about a subject that really isn't talked about enough because often people are uncomfortable talking about it. We're going to talk about some of the practical and emotional issues around death and dying. I'm Sally Turner and I'm joined by 4 members of our Martlets team who work directly with patients and their families. So I start by introducing Guy Chetwynd Appleton, who's a nurse on our inpatient unit.
Hello.
And Lisa Carelsa, who's a clinical nurse specialist who cares for people out in the community.
Hi.
And Jane Cato, who's our counselling and bereavement services manager.
Hello.
And finally, Dr. Simone Ali, who is the medical director and a consultant in palliative medicine.
Everyone.
So we're going to start by discussing how to have a conversation with others about death and dying. So that might be with loved ones or with children. It might be soon after someone's received a diagnosis or perhaps at the end of their life in their last days and weeks. So Jane, I wondered if you'd like to start off and obviously talking in your capacity as a counsellor.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, Sally, because how do you start having a conversation with people when you know that they may have a terminal illness, a prognosis of several weeks or several months? It requires such sensitivity. And the thing I do is I actually see the person in front of me as a person, not someone who has arrived with a diagnosis. They obviously have got some needs and they want something from us. But actually, it's who they are that I'm really interested in, and they can tell me what they understand about what's happening to them or their loved one, so that then gives me a sense and a way in to be able to begin those really sensitive conversations. Because if I mean, I'm sure the others will agree with me, if you get it wrong right at the beginning, you actually begin to lose trust. You may have missed that one crucial opportunity to actually start to talk about the things that are so important. And sometimes I'm thinking of a woman I worked with a while ago, and we knew she only had something like a month. You can never know how much longer someone's got to live, but you know, roughly it seemed it was about a month, and in actual fact it was 5 weeks, and she was living still. She was absolutely living. She had young children. She still was thinking about treatment options, but the illness that she had and the extent to where it had spread, and how she was progressing through her symptoms and getting sicker sort of weekly, we knew that it was unlikely that she had much longer to live. And she also had children and a husband and family that she wanted to talk about what was happening to her, and she was wanting to live. I don't know whether anyone else wants to sort of say to that.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with you, Jane. I mean, you're right. It can be incredibly hard to sort of predict prognosis or when things start to take a turn or show signs of clinical deterioration. But for me, it's exactly what you've said, which is almost that's in parallel with going at the pace that the person wants to go at themselves. So this lady that you're describing, who was clearly wanting to live life to its fullest right to the end, it's how you support someone to do that while still holding that clinical information. And how do you do that? How do you facilitate and empower your clients, our patients, to do that without taking away all hope, but B, also maintaining an element of a bit of reality, I suppose, and what is going to be achievable. So I think managing expectations is really quite a challenge, but you're right, if you miss the opportunities, you're always playing catch up, aren't you?
Yeah. And I think in the community, you know, like when we go for our first patient visits, we're armed with the information that we got from a referral sheet, which may or may not be accurate or good, and go into a situation where we're seeing more and more, for instance, young people who haven't even got to an oncologist yet, and we can look at them and think, well, actually, you're not going to make it to your oncology appointment. And how do we address that right there and then? Young family, and actually this is the end of the road now, you know. So it is, as you say, Jane, it's looking at what's in front of you, and then mustering up some courage sometimes to be able to say the next thing or ask the next question. And especially when, you know, you're dealing with people who want to be resuscitated, and, you know, there's quite a lot going on. And then it's how we have that conversation that has everybody then on the same page by the end of that episode of care. It takes something, and it's of great service to the family, because so many people just have no clarity when we go in. They don't really know what's going on. They don't really know what's going to happen next. So we do make a difference right at the outset for a lot of those conversations.
In the context of inpatient care, we have some of the same situations, but it's a little bit different, because often our patients have actually had some element of advanced care planning. So we're not going in cold like maybe you are, Lisa, at times. But there is a key difference, which is that we work day and night with the patients, and we do intimate care. We form a really close rapport sometimes. And actually, I find in my experience that you have to be hyper aware and sort of looking for those trigger points so people want to initiate that conversation. It could happen where they've just finished having a wash, is one example, or an intimate moment where just the thoughts in their brain and it's just you there, and they ask a question, and you have to be a little bit switched on about, are they wanting to start this conversation? Because if you, like you say, if you miss it, you could shut down that whole avenue of conversation. So
it's so always funny you should say that, Guy, because I've just done a teaching session for some care home staff, and I've just said that to them. Your antenna have to be so hyper alert. Yeah. And it's an art this becomes an art rather than a science. And building up that knowledge of that person, you become aware, like the skills that you and your colleagues have on the ward, and Lisa and her team and Jane and her team have. You become aware of those opportunities, and you sort of grab them, and you see if there's an open door upon which you can push, and you kind of do this dance, don't you? Yeah. Sometimes you can push, but you know when to stop, and you've got to take a step back.
Exactly. Because that door could just slam shut if you're not careful. Yeah. And also the other important thing to say is that I'm talking from the context of me being a trained nurse. I actually think that those conversations, I think they happen much more with the healthcare assistants and the untrained staff. And I hate that phrase, because that doesn't represent what they do, because they're amazing. But I think, you know, they may not have had some of the training that I've had, but I think they're very, very good at picking up on those cues and raising them. And
those people feel safer with them, don't they, Guy?
Yeah, it's like a human connection.
And it may be the conversation with one of the housekeeping staff, or you know, it could be anybody. And sometimes you know, doctors and nurses represent authority and knowledge, and they're scared of what they're going to hear. And so it's I think the whole team are really, you know, aware of that, being really attuned to the moment.
Isn't that interesting? That's like a reminder to us that death and dying is a human experience. It's not a medical one, is it? It's a human thing. And so this is what people should be able to talk about with other people, rather than with your doctor or your oncologist.
Yeah, absolutely.
It never occurred to me before that.
You can have the opposite too, which is that some people get a diagnosis and they immediately go straight for death. And in actual fact, they then think I'm going to die. But in actual fact, they have a huge range of life still to live, and their family and their friends. And you know, again, if we've got a young family and the person who's got the diagnosis is thinking they're going to die, and they've got young children, those young children are going to be so confused and impacted by living in the shadow of something that's not actually going to happen for a really long time. And so there's another art, because I really agree with you, Simone. It really is an art about how to just open up people's awareness at the same time as holding their pain and their fear, because a lot of this is generated from fear, and not knowing, but not giving them too much information, or information that they can't understand and digest. And I think that everyone at Hospice is really brilliant at how they and how we speak really normal language most of the time.
And I also, you know, and also we're dealing with families often who it's not the same. They're not in sync with each other around stuff. So then it's also managing that in a conversation where you're having this conversation and the views are completely different. And then, you know, it's addressing all the issues, isn't it? And us having, we have like there's something quite intuitive sometimes just about those situations where you've been in with people time and time again, that you can just pick up things sometimes when you go into a house now. For me, I feel that I can pick up a vibe. I can pick up that so-and-so's not talking, and then I say, are you okay? And that starts another whole conversation, and just it's all the background stuff as well. It's not just a word conversation. It's everything.
Body language.
That you take into consideration, that you have to not drop the ball with. It's like everything.
Think about the question you asked, Sally, which is how to start a conversation and then continue it. It's also about slowing things down, so that people can have a little bit of time to, you know, actually digest. And some people will actually want to flee and not face it. But actually, if we do slow it down, it gives everyone the best chance of being able to kind of just grasp something of what's happening.
Can I ask something of you guys? You know, what struck me is that I'm sometimes asked by friends of people that are dying, or family members of people that are dying, you know, I want to talk about it, but I don't know how to start. You know, strikes me that it would be really helpful to be able to give some pointers to those individuals who maybe want to support their loved ones a bit better, or actually prepare themselves, but they don't know how to go about it. Jane, do you think we can help there?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really important question, because people don't know how to start. I think when I think about it with my bereavement sort of work, the same question comes up for people, which is I don't know how to speak to them since they've lost their husband or whoever it is. And what I say is just acknowledging and reaching out to them and saying something that is real. You know, like, you know, it's good to see you. How are you? Something really open, not your are you okay? Because I think people aren't okay, you know, and they won't feel met by that. What about you, Lisa?
Yeah, we get asked the same question, and I think I always just ask people, you know, what they think, like get them to answer the question themselves. Often that works, asking the question back.
Yeah.
And just being able to give some, depending on how close they are to dying as well, like really being able to support them to prepare themselves and others, you know, using the literature that we have. You know,
so Hospice. I think you're absolutely right. What do you think? So I mean, following on from Simone, how can we help people think about how to speak to people? So sometimes it's useful to ask them to imagine how they might feel and what they feel of the other person. But for I really think it's about just making contact, just being there. There isn't anything anyone can do, because actually what people want is not to be ill, not to have a terminal illness, to be dying, not to have their loved one be dying, and not to be bereaved. And we can't do that. You know, we'd love to, but so actually just being able to be alongside someone when that level of distress is hugely helpful. And so many people say to me, I can't do anything, I feel helpless. And in actual fact, their presence is really helpful.
Yeah. And what people often want is to be heard, don't they? So even, and sometimes I think a good reminder is that although that person might feel, oh my gosh, I don't want to broach this because I'm going to upset them, I don't want to, I'll focus on something positive. Actually, in my experience, people find it a great relief to be able to almost unburden themselves with their worries, or just say it out loud and be heard. And I think you know, those conversations often don't go as badly as people perceive that they might. It's actually a big weight lifted off everybody's shoulders.
We can also say it's okay to be upset, it's okay to have strong feelings, and actually it's really good to feel them and express them, because it gives you more space inside.
And it's okay to impart to people that it's okay that you can't solve this person's problems, because I think maybe that's a source of, well, I can't do anything about it, so let's just put it away. Whereas actually they may need someone just to be on that journey with them, just so they feel held.
We get that feedback a lot in terms of that's how we're perceived for people. Okay,
well, that's great, thank you. If we can move on to the next sort of stage of the conversation, which is what to expect when someone's dying. So I suppose the physical stages of dying and the clinical support, but also the emotional impact.
So I get asked this a lot when I'm seeing someone for the first time and we're discussing advanced care planning and death and dying. How will I know? What do I expect? And there's, you know, we can certainly stage it and say how it should go, and then there's the things that happen that don't go that way. So but generally what I say to people is that they can measure it themselves. You know, the thing that you could do today, you're climbing the stairs, are a great one. You know, you can climb, it's the way that you are on the stairs, and then you can see, you know, like a week later you're not so good on the stairs. So there's that monitoring that people can do if they want to. But generally it's a natural death, so we expect to see, you know, somebody's energy levels decrease, their need for food and drink will wane, they will sleep more, they'll be more tired, they'll sleep more, and that's something that makes lots of people. So in terms of emotional impact, food and drink, lots of emotional impact when that decreases, and that's also across different cultures. It can be worse. And that's often a time where we're giving a lot of support to people, because the way that people express love often is to give someone food and to water and nurture them like that. So that's a big one. And then just generally sleeping more, spending more time asleep than awake, not taking meds by mouth, you know, just swallowing a less, if you like, taking less intake, and then we respond with that. And then closer to the time, breathing changes, somebody not really responding, and then we talk about things like secretions that could occur, so noisy breathing, and just how somebody just, you know, will die. And often, and actually, Simone, I always remember that you said this, and it's something that I say quite a lot, is people ask how they'll know, and what, you know, how soon, when will they die, which is, you know, it doesn't, we can get that wrong. So I say what you said a long time ago, is that if if you're noticing that there are changes, like on the stairs, for instance, week by week, we're looking at weeks. And then if you see the changes are happening, you know, more frequently, you could look at, you know, that this is going to be days if you can see things are changing daily. It's very helpful. And what I do is I think it's important to take the panic or anxiety out of it by just letting people know that they're really, like you were saying earlier, Jane, there really isn't anything that they need to do, that they're just there, that they're with the person through the different stages, that if, you know, I say to someone, if you're asleep, you can't eat and drink if you're asleep. So, you know, don't try and make someone eat and drink when they're sleeping, because you wouldn't be able to do that. So there's all these ways we can talk to people, but the important thing to reiterate always is that this is a natural progression. Somebody is dying, they're naturally closing down. It's expected. This is what's going to happen. We've had the ACP conversation. So, you know, and there's a lot more like you know, and then that aim, I think that's the foundation of somebody dying well, people accepting what's going on. And then of course there's cases where it doesn't work like that, where people collapse and they die, and there's those kind of cases for the unforeseen. But I even will talk about the unforeseen things and situations where I know what those might be. And that's how we address advanced care planning, is to talk about all the possible scenarios as well, if it's appropriate. So yeah, just to say that to you, Simone, that's always been a very helpful tool.
Yeah, I'm glad if that's of help. Because going back to Jane's original point, prognostication's so hard, none of us can. And the longer, I don't know about you guys, but the longer you're in this job, the more you realize how wrong you can get it if you try, because there's so much variability between people. Of course there is. But it is a sort of good way of guesstimating, really, and giving some people some kind of parameters in terms of time so that they can prepare. You know, and it's interesting your point, Lisa, about nourishment and hydration. You know, that's what we all want to do to our loved ones when they're ill, don't we? We want to feed them up and get them well and make them stronger. And it's those really, like, again, going back to what you said, Lisa, the courage to have those conversations about, this is a different sort of circumstance now. This is a situation where the body's needs are different, and we're having to pace things differently so that the body can cope with its changing function, really. I think for me, one of the really biggest challenges is when the body and the mind or spirit are at different places. So the body is deteriorating and declining at one pace, but the head and the spirit is declining far more, you know, slowly. So the physical ability is really diminishing, but the spirit is so able, and that frustration, and that's the one, if I could have a wish list of a magic potion or treatment up my sleeve to pull out, you know, it would be that. How do you manage someone's expectations of themselves when they've lived their whole life like that? But we know that people, I think we know, this is my experience, that people die how they lived.
Yes.
So why would someone that was feisty and independent and in control of their lives suddenly lose all that at the point at which they're dying? And it's really hard to have an answer for that. But, you know, Guy, you said it before, you don't have to have the solutions, you just need to hear it.
Just be there.
And
Simone,
we can, sorry.
I was just going to say, Simone, I have found that people, family members, have found it really useful when they hear that you know, why should someone suddenly change? You know, we live how we live, and we're going to die how we live, and then people kind of.
Got it.
Yeah, it's like, of course, they're so independent, they wouldn't receive help. They would do it their own way, and it's sort of just, it does help them.
Yeah, it's great that you said that, Simone, because yes, I can think already when you said that of a good few people. But I was playing tennis 5 weeks ago, and you know they're going to drop dead soon, and they're like, no, but I was playing like that. And also the other place that it comes up is in relationships. I mean, I have felt like a marriage counselor more than 100 times, where we're talking about to people, you know, just because this person before you is dying, they're sick, and they're still the way that they are as people. And this doesn't just mean that suddenly the dynamic between the two of you is fixed and you can just be lovely to each other. This is not what happens. Don't feel bad about that. You know, when there's all the frustration and the upset and all of that as well. But
weirdly, that is weirdly sometimes gives us a real sense of reassurance to the family, because they realize they haven't lost that person. That person's still here, aren't they? Their personality still alive and kicking.
Yes.
And then you do get the acceleration of unresolved issues being able to be really, well, you have both, don't you? You have some that just never get resolved and actually can accelerate in the wrong direction and cause fracture and further disharmony. But I've seen so many times, it's just amazing. It's so transformative to see people actually be able to forgive each other or acknowledge each other. They're different. And so in my bereavement work, they are nuggets of gold, because it's really just made that big difference. And the opposite is true, where in actual fact, something never ever got said, it wasn't possible, it could have been a sudden death, they weren't prepared, and they chew over it and then feel guilty, and it can be insidious. And the work then is to just loosen that up a bit and get them to connect with the positive things. Doesn't become unbalanced, because that's, I think, can happen a lot, is things can get really unbalanced when people get so sick and are under such stress.
Yeah,
I agree.
Yeah. And we hold all of that and all of those people, but I guess it's our frail elderly population living alone. Those are the, that's the vulnerable sector. That's for me, if I had a wand, if I could make a real difference, it would be avoiding the things that happen in that situation, and avoiding hospital admissions and
Okay, well, let's move on to Lisa. You touched on earlier about how to prepare for end of life, and you mentioned advanced care planning. Perhaps we could just talk a little about that, but also it would be good to touch on the Dying Matters theme last month, which was what does it mean to be in a good place to die? So it'd be good to hear your thoughts on that. Simone, would you like to?
Yeah, well, it's an interesting question, isn't it? And my immediate inclination is wherever the patient says it is, so ask them. But that's, I guess, why we're having this conversation. Easier said than done, isn't it? It's really hard to broach those conversations. In my experience, I think what people want to maintain, perhaps even above all other things, maybe, is a sense of control and a sense of that, their own autonomy, their own ability to govern their lives in the future that they have in front of them, however uncertain that might be. And our job maybe is to offer some clarity in a situation which is really uncertain. So whatever clarity we can offer, whatever framework we can offer, scaffolding, so that people can build on it, to give them some form of structure for what might be a very uncertain future, I think is really valuable. So preparing for the future strikes me as a really important thing to do in order to give people a bit of control over how they live the rest of their life. And that's why we as healthcare professionals have to take those opportunities, seek them out. I mean, proactively seek the opportunities out, not wait for them to come to us, because if we wait, they may never present. We've got to look for them, sometimes create them. And so that's really, I think, a matter of asking people, well, what do you think? Even when people are well, when there's stuff happening in the news, look at the pandemic, that's really brought to the fore some conversations that I think people never thought they were going to have at this moment in their lives. It has, sort of propelled us forward into, and people are having conversations that they didn't think they'd need to have or would want to have right now. But it's it might even be a case of, my gosh, you know, look at what's happening in certain part of the world, or did you hear about so and so, what happened to them? Gosh, how you know, if that was you, what would you want for yourself? Maybe that's a really sort of non-threatening way, in a way, when you're well, to start introducing the conversations. Of course, it becomes more important and relevant when someone is given a life-limiting diagnosis, because then things become a bit more real. But I think asking people what's important to them, what they value, what their beliefs are, what their healthcare beliefs are, who are the people that they want to play a part in that planning process, all of those things are really important when it comes to advanced care planning. And by the way, we ought to probably just say what advanced care planning is. It's preparing for a point in the future about how you want your care to look should you lose the capacity, the mental capacity to articulate that yourself. So you're having conversations in a timely way with those people looking after you about your wishes and preferences are for your future care, so that they know how you would want to best be looked after. And for me, that's what makes a good death. That those are the ingredients that stand the highest chance of someone having a death that they would want. They have a higher chance of dying where they want to die. They have a higher chance of dying how they want to die, i.e. with minimal medical interventions, or with the most that they could possibly be offered that would be clinically appropriate. And I think if there's openness and transparency from as early a point as possible, I think that does give people a sense of control, an ability to plan, ability to relieve what they might perceive as burden to those around them. That, you know, I've done my will, everyone's looked after, a sense of completion, so that they can, I suppose, in a way, get on with the business of dying. I know that sounds really bizarre, but you know, they've done the practical stuff, and now they can focus their energies on the rest. So for me, that's what constitutes a good death.
Dying is a lot of work. When you're someone, so say if you are the head of a household, or you own a business, or whatever it is, there's a lot of work before you can get to the process of, okay, I'm like physically dying now. And that I've seen that relief of people have when they've got their will, they know what's happening financially. I think that aspect of it isn't really sort of discussed sort of in the wider culture. And also, and this is a British thing, we don't, as a nation, we sort of like, let's put that in a drawer and not talk about that. So the idea of actually talking about this frankly with the people you care about, and making plans, and actually the relationship with the medical aspect, where rather than like, oh, I've completed the DNA CPR, goodbye, actually having open conversations about what are your wishes, what do you want. It's part of a sort of cultural evolution. Yeah. In terms of, yeah, and there's still so much work to do, which is the point of all of this sort of stuff. Because I think things have obviously changed a lot, you know, over, you know, the last 10, 20 years, but I still think there's probably not enough openness about death and dying among people in this country. That's just, you know, subjective, but it's a continuing work.
Yeah. I absolutely agree with you, because I even noticed for myself, so I'm a South African nurse, so I don't really go in very British like, but I've noticed even my own ability to have the conversation has developed. There were things I used to say in the past about, oh, don't call an ambulance, or I don't say that anymore. I say, you know, please, you know, if you feel you need to call an ambulance, do that, but make sure that they call the Martlets, and we set it all up. I even write it in their respect forms. You know, I set things up, and I think you're right, Simone. It's just this thing of getting, once all of that's in place, it's really like, okay, so that's all done now. Now you can just get on. And lots of people, it is a weight that's lifted, and they understand it's a practical thing and that their wishes will be honored. But I find that I have those conversations much more easily and much more frankly, but in a gentle way, and I know where to start. And it's not always the same starting point when I'm in the house. It depends who I'm with. Some people, you'll go in there and they're waving the purple form at you, you know, and you know that, and then some people, you know, tell you they want to be resuscitated when you walk in, and that's a different conversation. So it depends where people are at, and we've got to know where they're at. And for people who are dying quickly and soon, and I've seen this happen often, the rapport that we have to build has to be quick. And it's, you know, it's an intense episode, and sometimes we only get that one visit in to do all of that, but it's possible to do it. And it's a real commitment that we all have, which makes us good at our jobs, is that we want this to go well for people, and we care about people, and we want their last memories to be that, you know, that somebody died peacefully, and that, you know, they had the support they needed. And you know, and so, yeah, it's great when those conversations can happen over time, but there isn't always the time. And it's great to have a connection with people. So it's not always us to do that, but if it is us to develop a connection with people, really it becomes a skill to do that. But it's possible, and to start the conversation where it's appropriate to start for that person. That would be my take.
I do think relationship makes a difference.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I was really heartened when I came to Martlets was that there was remained an emphasis on the relationship that the healthcare professionals have with the patients and their families, because there are a lot of other healthcare providers who have taken that out. And I absolutely know that when people feel safe and attached, they can get attached to Martlets, and then it actually doesn't matter who they see because they feel safe by Martlets. But most people connect to human beings. And so it may only be 1, 2 or 3 occasions when you can see someone, but there's something about that how they are really matters to us. We want what they want for themselves when it's possible. And so that relational piece is really, really important. And makes a difference. And we're there when then we're needed, and then we pull away when we're not, because it's actually about them. And we want them to feel that they have it in them to be able to cope and manage, even if they're falling apart and don't believe that they possibly can manage because the worst things happen to them. So actually what we do is that whilst we're offering them support, we're also enabling them to access their own resource to be able to manage. I
think you're right, Lisa, you know, all of you, and Lisa, what you said about we really are committed to getting this right for people. We've got one chance to get it right. And often we can. And I think where there's family or significant others involved, how wonderful for them, you know, because they know then that their loved one had an end that they had sort of, you know, wished for themselves, and that we've played hopefully a part in achieving that. I think we ought to acknowledge there are some times where we just can't, and it's messy and it's hard and it's not clean. And you know, I think if we can acknowledge that as professionals, that's a good start. But also I think if we can be honest with people, with patients, that's probably the best thing we can do. So I'm thinking, I suppose, Lisa, of patients that you and I have looked after who have wanted to die at home, but you and I know that the kind of illness that they have may not lend itself to that because of the complexity or the unpredictability or the specialist nature of the help that they're going to need. And I think, you know, what we can do there, the best we can do there is to be really honest and not, you know, of course be sensitive, of course, but not sugarcoat things too much. I think, you know, I worry that sometimes there's a tendency for us to feel that we have to toe the party, you know, say the party line and support something that in our heart of heart we might not feel. But one thing I think we do well, and I've seen you do and the team do, and the team on the ward as well, if someone wants to go home to die, but actually we think maybe a nursing home might be more appropriate, or that they may not get home. Those honest conversations is, I think, one of the most brave and courageous things that we can do, because if people don't have the truth, if they're not armed with the facts, how can we expect them to plan? How can we expect them to engage in this magical thing called advanced care planning if we haven't been decent enough to be honest? So I think that's something we ought to acknowledge, really.
It's a dignity issue. That they have their wishes, that we can do that with them and be open and be with them. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you for that. I wondered if we could just bring things to a close by I ask each of you, so what's the one thing you'd like to share about death and dying, or what would you most like people to take away from this conversation? Perhaps if I start with Guy.
Oh my Lord. Completely on the spot, even though it says it here on this piece of paper. So, so I guess the one thing is, dying is part of life, and it's like it's what has already been discussed in this conversation. It's like we need to be open and honest about it. We need to acknowledge it, and it doesn't, obviously there's grief and there's sadness, but a death can be, beautifully managed and can be, it's part of life. It doesn't have to be awful. It can be beautiful, and I'm not articulating this very well.
No, you did.
But I worked at Martlets for 4 years. Before that, I was an intensive care nurse, and I've seen all sorts of different deaths, and I've seen very dignified ones and very not dignified ones, and I'm very proud to be able to facilitate people's care having a dignified death. It's a tremendous privilege. Yeah. No. Oh, so I'm supposed to say who the next person is. Lisa.
Yes, so for me, in the context of people being able to die, have that period of dying before they're dead, as opposed to sudden death, which I think is very different. I think, being able to die naturally and to have some of the conversations like Jane was talking about earlier, where people can reconcile. There's an opportunity to forgive and say goodbye and have the closure. If that can go well, and that's what we provide. We support that going well, and having all those conversations. So that's what I want people to know, that it's possible that can all go really, really well, and that there will be opportunities to say goodbye and to die peacefully.
Can I just say as well, I know I've had my time, but I think it's more and more important to be honest about the language we use, and this is as nurses, but I think as a wider culture, instead of saying passed away, climbed the stairs, whatever, it's like they died. It's no different to they were born. It's part of life, and acknowledging that is a part of dealing with it. And yeah. So.
I'm with you on that, Guy. Any thoughts, Jane?
I've got loads of thoughts. I'm reading Hamnet at the moment, which is a book that I would highly recommend, and it is all about life and death, and it's written in the 16th century Shakespeare time. And in those days, they expected to have pregnancies that didn't go to full term. They expected pregnancies sometimes not to be the baby to be born and to die. They expected death in childhood, and then they would have various plagues. And it's so interesting reading it alongside what we're living in at the moment with the pandemic, where if there's one hope that I have that's come out of COVID is that it has brought the fear of death a little bit more into the forefront for people to be able to just get hold of, because actually, just as you're saying, we're born and we die, and that's one thing we absolutely know is that we will die, that our loved ones will die. We just don't know when. And there's so much fear around, and what I would really want is for people just to find a way to loosen that fear, because the reason it's so fearful is it hurts, it's painful, but that is an expression of our love and our connection and being in the world, and that's the beauty for me, is that actually people love and care for each other, and I'm absolutely with you, Guy. Death can be really amazing, and it can really be transformative, and it is painful in different ways. And I've been working for 35 years in HIV and AIDS for 16 years, and then moved into palliative care, and I marvel all the time still, because we're all different, and it's so precious to everyone. And yeah, that's me. Simone, over to you.
Well, I think I'll have a couple of messages, one for people, public, us, and one for colleagues, professionals. The thing I'd like to say to professionals, I'll start with that group, is stop making death and dying about failure. Stop feeling the need to without exception, kind of extend and prolong people's lives without any thought to the quality. Stop medicalizing dying. Yes, we have amazing technology, medical knowledge, interventions that can help prolong life, but use it with wisdom and in a considered way. And don't feel that you're failing if you're unable to do that. So that's number one. And what I would say to people is, as a bit of a Frank Sinatra thing, just do it your way. Say it out loud. If you've got thoughts or concerns or questions or things that you really do or don't want for yourself, but you haven't really said them out loud, say it to someone. If you don't say it out loud, how's anyone going to know? But do it your way and don't lose your sense of self. Be yourself to the end.
Lovely.
That's great.
Thank you all for taking part. We're planning some more of these Martlets conversations, so hopefully there'll be news of that soon. And if anyone watching wants any more information, you can, of course, go to martlets.org.uk. Thank you very much.